people overlook that element of it. People talk about it like it's winger is so easy. Just go play wing and then move over to center. Nah, it's not as easy as you think. When you're the weak side winger, sure, because, you're not the one that's getting caved in. And if, a pass from your defenseman or center to the strong side wing works out, you can anticipate that and break up the middle. And, he can do a nice little chip pass off the boards for you or give you a one touch up the middle, whatever. It's way easier being the weak side wing. And so when Hagens is the weak side wing, sure, he can cheat the game a little bit. He can take off, catch his strong side offensive defenseman, watching the play and sneak behind him. There's opportunity there. But I'm just saying, as a strong side wing, it's not as easy as people think in the defensive zone.
You're listening to the PuckUps podcast. It's time to hit the ice with Brian DeFelice.
Welcome into episode 58 of the PuckUps podcast. I am Brian DeFelice, and thank you all for joining me. Today's show will be a mailbag episode, so thank you all very much for sending in your comments and questions as always. And before we get started, please go ahead and subscribe to the PuckUps on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else that you get your podcasts. And to get in touch with me or be a part of the show for future mailbag episodes, you can email me info@thepuckups.com. You can tweet at me on X at @BrianDFelice_. You can tweet at the show at the PuckUps or leave a comment on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, anywhere the show has a social media account and post content. All right, let's kick things off here with a comment from Brad on YouTube. Brad says, been a fan for over 50 years. It is strange hearing our first game is in September. I do like there is not a long break this year. Brad, you and I both. We won't know why Kevyn Adams was hired until the shoe drops or it doesn't. Is it a wake-up call for Sweeney? Possible. Was Adams hired to shore up Sweeney's shortcomings drafting? My take on it is that if the Bruins get off to a bad start, Adams will be made general manager. So, Brad, I agree with most of what you're saying here. And ultimately, the way I would put it is I do think that the Bruins are hoping that Kevyn Adams can come along and help Don Sweeney and Cam Neely at the head of hockey operations. I think if you're the Jacobs, if you're Neely, you're hoping that this partnership works well. And I'll get to that in a second. But the other reason I think he was brought in, and it's kind of to your latter points here, is I think he's brought in part as an insurance policy at the general manager position. And I'll give a shout out to my father here because he did mention, and it's a good point. It's a really good point. I don't think it's a coincidence that Kevyn Adams, the previous general manager of the Buffalo Sabres, was hired by the Jacobs, because the Jacobs, who own and operate Delaware North, headquartered in what city? Oh, yes, Buffalo, New York. And if you know anything about Delaware North's business model, they're heavy into concessions, including at the Sabres home arena. So I'm not saying that, the Jacobs are, having steak dinners with Kevyn Adams all the time when he was in Buffalo. I just think that they're familiar with him. I do think that they, in some way, shape, or form, are used to working with him on a business level, but not on a hockey ops level, because obviously they don't own the Buffalo Sabres, they own the Boston Bruins, and that's where their hockey interests lie. But from a business perspective, I just wouldn't be surprised if, their paths have crossed while they have, business interests in the Sabres home arena, and probably other, community interests, along with Kevyn Adams at the time being a GM there. So I think that there's some familiarity there. I don't think the hiring was a coincidence. And so we all know the Jacobs like to hire people that they, like and have good relationships with. And I don't think that's uncommon for employers. Employers want to hire people based on their performance. Yes. But if someone's hard to work with and, employers don't love that. So, I think the Bruins clearly, they enjoy, and I'm talking about Bruins ownership, they enjoy working alongside Cam Neely, who's been their poster child of the organization for about, 35 years now. And Don Sweeney's obviously, outside of his brief stint in Dallas as a player, has been a Bruins lifer. So what's the next best thing? If you have to replace Don Sweeney at some point on the fly, well, Kevin Adams, who, by the way, was a Bruins draft pick under Jacobs' ownership, even though uh, he and Sinden didn't see eye to eye and he never played a game for the Bruins. So I'm not saying that there's a lot of love lost there. But that being said, I just don't think it's a coincidence. So I do think that Kevin Adams was brought in part as an insurance policy at GM. If the Bruins ever had to make a change on the fly in season, I think they feel more comfortable with a guy that they know and a guy that they know has done the job at the NHL level. Evan Gold, for example, who was the previous Bruins assistant general manager. I think he's still in place until August 1st, maybe. And he was also the general manager of the Providence Bruins. He lacks, GMing experience at the highest level. I don't think the Jacobs would have felt as comfortable if they hired Sweeney midseason to have Evan Gold step in. I think they would prefer somebody who has more experience on their resume and more of a hockey background, because Evan Gold, very smart man, but not really, I don't think hockey ops is his forte. So in any event, we won't know why he was hired until the shoes drop or they don't. I mean, yes and no. Like, I think it's fair to assume right now that the Bruins hired Adams because they think he can help out, Sweeney and Neely, possibly in the drafting, identification part of of GMing. Although, that's really more, Ryan Nadeau's job and the scouting staff, but I'm sure Kevin Adams will be plugged in with those guys. So yeah, I think they hired him because they think he's a smart hockey mind and can help out and bring a fresh perspective to the Brewers organization. But I also think that he's an insurance policy. I do, because I don't think Kevin Adams' dream's job is going forward is to be Don Sweeney's advisor. I think it's probably to, somehow, some way get back to, a GM role at the NHL level, if not some sort of, president role, maybe later on in his career. But, sure, maybe Kevin Adams is trying to get back into good graces to be a GM in the NHL. Well, why can't Boston be that possibility, right? If we just don't know. But I think the Bruins kind of hired him for multiple purposes and multiple different scenarios that may or may not unfold. So thanks for the question there, Brad. This question is from Bahaha O Canada on YouTube, who says, I do want to hear more hype on Dans Locmelis. I feel he is a dark horse in camp. I've had my eye on development. I think he's worth a shot. He's been a stud in international. Injuries have affected his North American career, but he's got a lot of grit and he has skill. And I couldn't agree more. I'm a big Dans Locmelis fan. I have been since his time at UMass Amherst, is when I really started to kind of focus on him. And then he came to Providence, had 12 points in 6 games, I think. And he played well in Providence last year too. To Baja's point here, he's done well at international levels too. He's had some really, really notable tournaments, world championships a couple of years ago. And then obviously the Olympics this past February when he actually got hurt. And this is why I think you're not hearing much about him right now, because he required shoulder surgery back in February with a 6-month recovery timeline. So that puts us into August, right? So his off-season training is delayed. And right now, as we speak in late July, I don't think Locmelis is probably in training mode. He's probably still in the later stages of recovery, which means it would have to be a sprint for him to get ready for training camp in September. To Brad's point in the other question in the beginning, where he's looking forward to an earlier start this year. So I just think that with Locmelis, I totally agree that if he were healthy right now, he could hit the ground running at training camp. He'd be a dark horse to make the team for sure. I just think that with his off-season ailment and recovery, combined with the fact that the Providence Bruins roster still needs some player fill out, right? They've had a lot of movement over there this offseason, and it's going to be a much different Providence Bruins looking team. Speaking of the Providence Bruins, Mark Diver on Twitter on Friday did mention, or maybe it was late Thursday night, he's hearing that Trent Whitfield is going to be named the head coach of the Providence Bruins. He's been with the Providence Bruins as an assistant coach for 10 years. You may remember Whitfield with the Boston Bruins briefly. I think he may have played a game or two in the year they won the Stanley Cup and maybe the year before. And he was a Black Ace the year the Bruins won the Cup. So, he was one of the players on the ice who were celebrating the Bruins Stanley Cup championship in 2011. Although he was watching the game from the locker room and, got dressed strictly for the celebration with the other Dark Aces. But in any event, when it comes to Whitfield, I know he's put his time in, assistant coaching in the minors. I know a lot of fans might look at it and say they couldn't have brought in a fresh outside voice. But at the end of the day, I don't know enough about Whitfield to say it's not a good hire. As long as he's good with younger players, like if his focus and emphasis is going to be on development, then I got no problem with it. And I believe Ryan Bourque, Ray Bourque's youngest son, is going to be assistant coaching there for a second season. So I'm optimistic that with Ryan Bourque, who's a younger kid, he can relate to. I think he's maybe 34, 35. So he can relate to the younger players. And Whitfield, I think he can appreciate the grind of the American Hockey League because he spent most of his career there and understands that it's, development, I think, is the focus going forward. But as it pertains to Locmelis, I just think that you might see him in all likelihood start in Providence because he could use the rev back up, and they need bodies and they need guys to play all minutes, and Locmelis would be an all minutes player for them. And I do look for him at some point to get looks in Boston. If it's not right away, at some point throughout the season with injuries, I'm high on the player. I think he's really smart. I think he competes really hard. He does have skill. So what is his ceiling at the NHL level? Who am I to put a ceiling on somebody? But I would say his ceiling would probably be maybe a third liner, maybe a second liner if things really went well. You just never know. You really just never know. But I agree with you. He's a dark horse in camp. With all the reasons I mentioned, I would be more surprised if he was at the NHL level to start than in Providence. But where you start isn't necessarily where you finish. And I strongly encourage those of you who aren't familiar with Locmelis to this point to keep an eye on him in Providence next year and follow his career, because I do think he's promising. But another guy he'll be battling with is Matt Poitras. Matt Poitras remains unsigned as an RFA right now, but what do they do with Poitras? So yeah, Locmelis is a dark horse. I think injuries is the biggest reason why you haven't heard much of his name this summer, because people know that he's got a very short time here in August to get back up to speed for training camp, and it's kind of a tough ask for the player. All right, let's go to an email here from Bruno. Bruno says, I've read the report on the top 100 drafted NHL prospect rankings, and James Hagens is listed 13th overall, 4th at the center position, with Dean Letourneau ranked 81st overall, 23rd among centers. And this brings me to the question, why on earth do the Bruins need or insist on easing Hagens in to the NHL playing wing? Is it because we have a logjam at center with Zacha, Lindholm, Minton, Corrali, and maybe Poitras? You could add Locmelis to that too, potentially, at some point. Is he last in line, or should he get more opportunities to prove his worth, since he, at least apparently, is so talented? Much success. Thank you, Bruno. So, listen, I think you kind of hit it with the logjam. I think it's a seniority thing, and I think it's a bit of a logjam right now. I think Pavel Zacha is a guy who is an established, on the Bruins, he's probably playing higher potentially than where he would be on a deeper team, but he's an established, let's call it top 6 center. Okay. Certainly a second line center. And maybe on the deepest of teams, he'd be a third line center. But Zacha is he's the top 6 forward. He's a top 6 forward. And so he's one, right? He's blocking Hagens right now because he's more polished. He's a ready now product, obviously. Clearly, he's almost 30. Fraser Minton, he's he's a little bit ahead of Hagens in his development, a little bit older, more experience at the top level, and had a really strong rookie year, showed a lot of promise. So we expect him to take another step forward. The third line is where it really kind of is interesting to me, because I think that if Hagens is not playing wing in the top six, which I wouldn't be opposed to at first, because I wouldn't hate Hagens playing with the Bruins top forwards. Like, that to me is also important. Like, if Hagens is playing center, but he's centering, Reichel and Steve, so I'm just going to throw out a couple of random bottom tier names. Like, would I rather that just to get him playing the position, or would I rather him playing on the wing with, Zacha and Geeky, or Zacha and Pastrnak? Like, so it just kind of depends how the lines shake out. However, yeah, you're right. Elias Lindholm is still on this team. And if I were running things, I would move Lindholm to the wing. I've made that pretty clear. And that doesn't mean that he can't take important faceoffs either, or help out down low as a strong side winger when appropriate in the defensive zone. But I think there's a spot there at third line center for Hagens, because I just don't see them doing Hagens with Pastrnak right away. And but maybe he plays second line and Minton's your third line center. So I guess we're making the assumption that they're going to start him at wing, because a lot of people think that's the case. And to your question, Bruno, if that's the case, why do the Bruins insist on doing it? I mean, I understand the thought process. I do. There's less responsibility at the wing, so it's the easier position, theoretically, to integrate into an NHL lineup at first, while learning the speed of the top level and just learning the game overall at the NHL level. And then once you've gotten used to that speed and those differences, and you can now potentially transition to center, right? So it's kind of like it's an easing process. But I've mentioned on the skate pod too, and I may have mentioned it on here, there are elements of playing wing at the top level that aren't as easy as people say. When you're a player of Hagens' skill set, and you think the game the way he does, and you skate the way that he can, you want that player to be all over the place. You want him to be impacting the game with his hockey IQ and his skill set in every element of the game. Now, he still has to be stronger and put on some weight, and he's going to. He's 19 years old. And, he's never going to be 6'5", so we can get over that part of it. Not every center is. But I just feel like stapling a player with his IQ for the game and his vision and his skating and his skill, to staple that player to the wing in the defensive zone, where you have very, very smart NHL defensemen who anticipate plays very well. Being a defenseman in the offensive zone can be a blast, because you can see everything in front of you, and you can see when your opposition's defense are under duress, and they're just trying to get rid of the puck off their stick the first time they can, because they know what it's like when they're in the D zone. And when a defenseman's under duress in their own zone, or a center iceman, and they get the puck and there's guys all over them, they're just chipping it to empty space where they can. And an offensive defenseman reads that. And so you have a pass coming to the winger on the strong side boards potentially. And most of the time there's pressure, and they don't have time to do it, and they're just getting caved in. And so, if you're Hagens and you're just under 6 feet, and you're a younger kid, and you're still putting on strength and weight, to have an NHL defenseman just cave in on you from your blind side because your defenseman's under duress and gives you a shitty pass, I'm not saying like he can't integrate into the game well at wing, but people overlook that element of it. People talk about it like it's winger is so easy. Just go play wing and then move over to center. Nah, it's not as easy as you think. When you're the weak side winger, sure, because you're not the one that's getting caved in. And if a pass from your defenseman or center to the strong side wing works out, you can anticipate that and break up the middle, and he can do a nice little chip pass off the boards for you, or give you a one touch up the middle, whatever. It's way easier being the weak side wing. And so when Hagens is the weak side wing, sure, he can cheat the game a little bit. He can take off, catch his strong side offensive defenseman, watching the play and sneak behind him. There's opportunity there. But I'm just saying, as a strong side wing, it's not as easy as people think in the defensive zone. And furthermore, you're limiting a smart player from playing the game and affecting the game all around the ice. Like when your hockey IQ is that of a player like Hagens, you can impact the game in all the small areas around the ice. And when you're playing wing, it's just kind of, all right, just wait here a little bit until the puck kind of comes to your neighborhood and make sure it gets out. And it's like, okay, well, that's kind of limiting my creativity a little bit. You're taking away from my strengths. So I just want to put that out there too. And I've had people comment, oh, well, the Bruins play, they play man on man in the D zone. So it's not like you're talking about where he's just stapled on the boards. That's not entirely true. The Bruins last year played a hybrid system of zone and man to man at different times. And either way, like, you still have far more, responsibility at center ice, but also far more creativity. And when it comes to a guy like Dean Letourneau, for example, is somebody who I think he's a center iceman right now at BC. I could see Letourneau being a center for the Bruins, obviously, because that's a position he plays and was drafted at. But if somebody has to go to wing between Letourneau and Hagens, I could honestly see it being Letourneau having the easier transition at some point, because, if you're a defenseman, and you're going to pinch on Dean Letourneau, well, good luck there. He's going to be, 6 inches taller than you. And his reach alone, imagine the creative plays that Letourneau can do. Like, with his reach in the D zone, even as a strong side winger on the boards, like, he can see a pass coming to him and do a creative, deflection off the boards where the defenseman's not going to see it coming, or he could just use his reach as a strength. And I could see him really being impactful on the boards. I could see him being impactful at center too. But think about down low. Sometimes when you're really big, your limbs are larger. The gap between your stick and your skates, your legs, there's a bigger gap there between your legs. Like, I could see really creative forwards finding those little seams between Letourneau's, anatomy. Whereas, Hagens can kind of be lower to the ice and, have better stick position and stuff. So that's a conversation for a different day. But I think the thought process here is, if you're going to start Hagens at wing, it's to ease him into the game a little bit, get used to the speed and the strength and of the NHL level, and then go to center. But I would like to see him at center right away, personally. But that's just me. So I don't know. I kind of see all sides of it. I do think that at some point he has to move to center ice. You have to at least give him a shot. And if he fails at being a center, then fine, move him to the wing. But he's been a center his whole life, outside of a little bit of time at BC. He's been a top prospect his whole life. He's grown. He's learned the game at that position. And some centers are smarter than others. And I'm telling you guys, this kid's hockey IQ is off the charts. I'm not just saying that because he's the Bruins prospect. I felt that way long before I ever thought the Bruins had a chance of drafting him, because he fell to them that draft night a couple of years ago. So thanks for the email, Bruno. I appreciate it. This comment is from Aiden on Twitter, who says, without watching yet, it should be, and Aiden's referencing my last video when I said who should be the Bruins top center to start next season. And their line combinations here are Morgan Geekie, centered by Fraser Minton, and then David Pastrnak on the right. Casey Middlestat, centered by James Hagens and JJ Peterka on the right. Elias Lindholm, centered by Matt Patra, and then Pavel Zacha on the right. And then Sean Corrali on the left, centered by Tanner Jeannot and Alex Steeves. They go on to say, we have a lot of natural centers, even if they can all play winger, it's still a lot. I think could make the jump. So players where there's an asterisk, he thinks they can make the jump. So a couple of notes here. I don't see Mark Kastelik's name, which I think Mark Kastelic is a sure thing on the Bruins fourth line this year. So, I would insert him onto that fourth line, certainly before, Corrali. I think if anybody's going to go, it would be Corrali. And I think Steves is your extra forward. And then you're also missing Marat Husnudinov. And I think Husnudinov is clearly going to be a top 9 player for this Bruins team, even with Casey Middlestad still here. So these are interesting combinations. I'm not entirely sure these are what I would draft up if I were in charge, but especially the Corrali, the Kastelik omission and the Husnudinov omission. And then, I don't want Middlestat, Hagens, and Peterka as a combination. I mean, I can see the argument for somebody wanting to keep Zacha with Middlestat because they worked well together last year. Yeah, I appreciate the suggestion here, but I don't see a lot of the continuity. I don't think these lines would be very realistic, but you know what? You never know, Aiden. You simply just never know. Rudy13 on YouTube says Hagens and Zacha on the first line with some positional freedom on offense and eventually having Hagens at center for either of the top lines plus power play 2 if he handles the start well, while having Minton centering line 2 with JJ Peterka and Morgan Geekie lets you put both of them in roles that would let them play to their strengths and pair them with guys who cover their weaknesses pretty well. Still, would like them to try to turn Yoki Haru and Middlestad, along with whatever else it would take to find some different options for the middle of the lineup. So okay, so again, this is in response to the last episode. And so in this scenario, you have Zacha centering Hagens and Pasternak, I would imagine. And so, okay, so to Rudy's point here, no, you don't have Hagens at center, but if he's not going to play center, at least he's playing with top 6 players, and in this case, Zacha and Pasternak. So you have the stability, the two-way stability, and the veteran maturity of Pavel Zacha, and then you have the upside and playmaking and skill set of Hagens to flourish as much as possible in his first year, with David Pasternak being on the right side and finishing off all those opportunities and setting each other up. Okay, that I like. And then you have Minton as your second line center with Peterka and Geekie. And again, to the point of the question here, the comment, you're putting Minton in a spot where he can succeed, because I feel like the Bruins' top 2 centers entering the season, in no particular order, would be Zacha and Minton, because I just don't think the Bruins are going to put Hagens in that situation right away. Maybe they put him at third line center right away, but I don't see them putting him at top 6 center. But we'll see what happens in training camp. Maybe he just goes off in training camp. So this is a situation where you're putting both Minton and Hagens with players that can, help them succeed around them. And yeah, I like this. And then maybe your third line in this situation could be, like maybe Husnudinov with Lindholm and Middlestad, or maybe, Reichel in there somewhere. So I like that option. I do like that option. I'm curious if the Bruins are going to be intent on putting Peterka with Pasternak right away. But you know what? Hagens, I can see them doing that too because of his upside and youth. So, yeah, I would be here for those options. Those are good. Those are good combinations. I'd be, realistically speaking, which is the nature of all these conversations, this is a situation where I could see the Bruins doing this, and it's not out of the realm of possibility. It would be more risky than I think that they're accustomed to, but still in the realm of realistic possibilities. I don't think these are crazy options. I really don't. Especially as the season gets going. Like maybe right away they'd be a little gun shy, but I could definitely see that top 6 combination being legit. Especially if they wake up to the fact that Elias Lindholm is not him. Like they got to make sure that he's in an appropriate position in this lineup. He doesn't have the skating ability, especially with his back injuries, to keep up with these top players anymore. He just doesn't. Can he carve out a role as a responsible, veteran third liner for a little bit? Sure, if he can stay healthy. But Elias Lindholm, he needs to be on the third line at the highest. One final comment on the last episode is from HockeyB on Twitter, who says, I very much agree with your line of thinking. Out of the realistic options, Minten is preferable. JJ Peterka, Fraser Minten, David Pastrnak, and then start Hagens at 2 left wing with some combo of Zacha, Geeky, or Elias Lindholm, last choice, HockeyB says here. Transition Hagens to center on that line, whoever it is. So HockeyB and Rudy on the last comment, they're of a similar mindset here, but they're both offering 2 different top 6 scenarios, and I'm cool with both of them. Again, I would like to see Hagens play center, but if he's not going to play center right away, I want him in the top 6, and that would mean him being at wing. So Rudy mentioned Hagens on the left with Zacha and Pastrnak. Here, HockeyB mentions Peterka on the left with Minten and Pastrnak. And then you have Hagens with Zacha and Geeky. So it's the same, it's accomplishing the same ideology of Rudy, where you're putting Minten and Hagens both in top 6 roles where they can succeed with some offensive freedom and with some responsible players around them. Well, I guess in Minten's case, Pastrnak wouldn't be very responsible defensively, nor would Peterka, but that's where Minten's strength is actually. So anyway, I like these options too. Again, the common theme here that I like is that the Bruins will be giving their younger players some real minutes here and real opportunity. And that's what I want to see. So, we can get creative and tinker with the options and the combinations, but as long as, they're these players that aren't just, it's not that they're just young, it's that they have a lot to offer. And I think that they'd give the Bruins the best chance to be, a successful team next year. Now let's finish off with a comment here on YouTube from Michael Davis. Michael says, I would still rather see Sturm advance the play style by playing younger, more skilled players and molding them to play the style he wants to coach them up to, so that this team becomes harder and harder to play against as the season goes on, even if it means dealing away veterans sooner than later that don't fit the mold, in favor of playing the fast, skilled young guys and coaching them up and taking their lumps, especially without McAvoy to start the season. I want to see more anxiety forechecking and much better breakouts, and defensemen not surrounding the entire middle of the ice all the way to their red line. That puts long-term wins and success ahead of immediate success by focusing on coaching up the speed and skill each and every day. So, Michael, I agree with a lot of what you're saying here. I think from Marco Sturm's perspective, to be fair to him, he does have to focus also on the immediate success too, because that's his job is to gain points at the NHL level. And if development happens along with that simultaneously, all the better. But development, people say that the NHL is not a developmental league. I push back on that, especially nowadays with the league getting younger and younger and younger. There is no such thing as playing your first NHL game a finished product. Everybody enters the NHL at some point unfinished, because you have to at some point adjust to the speed and the gameplay at the top level. Everything happens faster, harder, stronger, better, more skilled. So there's always an adjustment period. So those who say that NHL is not a developmental league, that's not entirely true. Like, for the most part, it's not. But everybody develops on the fly at some point when they make their NHL debut. So that's not entirely genuine of a statement. And And so when I say that, I do acknowledge that like Marco Sturm has to allow leash at the NHL level for his young players to learn and develop with NHL points on the line. Like you can't avoid that. So yeah, basically I agree with a lot of your sentiment here. Like I want the Bruins playing the younger players. I want Frederic Brunet playing over Henry Jokiharju. I want, Matt Patra playing over Sean Kuraly, or Dans Locmelis, if he's healthy, playing over Sean Kuraly. And I like Sean Kuraly as a pro. It's nothing to do. We're talking. You got to get younger faster. You have to. And I just think that fourth line, like Kaslik and Jeannot, they are a very intimidating fourth line. They do forecheck, with anxiety, like Michael mentions here. And I don't think adding Matt Patra over Sean Kuraly negates that. It's not like Sean Kuraly is out there putting guys through the glass. Like his game when he first came to the NHL was he was a big boy who could skate, and now skating isn't Kuraly's strength anymore. He's not an above average skater at the NHL level anymore. So you can still have that fourth line identity with Jeannot and Kaslik with Matt Patra there, at least to start. So if we're talking about Elias Lindholm getting ice time over Hagens, or Alex Steeves getting ice time over Hagens, or I'm with you. Like the Bruins have no choice here. They have to get younger and faster. And they're to their credit, like they're trying to, like they're getting there. But they'll take steps backwards next year if they insist on playing veterans with very, very low floors and like medium ceilings over younger players who have very high ceilings, and you just got to give them a chance. And again, part of this too is you have to keep David Pastrnak happy. You need to, and I don't mean that like in the world revolves around David Pastrnak. I just mean it goes for anybody, any top player for any team in any sport. If you have young top prospects and you see that they're getting opportunity and they're showing what they can do, it gives you hope, gets you excited. There's nothing wrong with saying the Bruins need to give David Pastrnak or Charlie McAvoy something to be excited about. Give them something to be excited about. What's wrong with that? It's not calling them bad guys. If we were all in their shoes, we'd feel the same way, right? So if you're McAvoy, would you rather see Frederic Brunet get a chance and take off, or Henry Jokiharju do his thing? If you're David Pastrnak, would you rather see James Hagens or Fraser Minton, really get a chance and take off here over the next couple of years? Or would you rather see, Elias Lindholm laboring out there with plays dying on his stick? No, you want to see the young guys get chances. Nothing wrong with that. So I think Marco Sturm's a really good coach. Nobody's a perfect coach, but he spent a lot of time in his coaching career developing younger players at the AHL level, and he played the game not too long ago. I think his final NHL game was in the last 15 years. So, Marco Sturm, he got his NHL career in the I think mid 90s, maybe the late 90s. So he entered the NHL in that. Oh, sorry for that little burp there, but he entered the NHL in a very, very rugged era, and he exited the NHL when it was starting to get towards the youth and the speed and skill game that we now see today. So he understands, but we do have to appreciate and respect that in his position, he does have to focus on points, because his job is to get to the Bruins to the playoffs. That's his job as a coach, and obviously to win a championship. So it is a fine line for Marco. He can't totally waste opportunities to gain points in the standings if at the expense of developing younger players. I just think that the younger players will help him do that. And I think, Michael, to your point, so do you. So we'll see how it all plays out. So that'll do it for this episode. Thank you all very much for listening. Have a wonderful weekend, and I'll talk to you all on Tuesday.